Hi guys, welcome to this month's Real English video. In these videos I take you around Scotland, tell you about its history and culture, and you get a great English lesson at the same time. Today, to mark International Women's Day, we're telling the story of the Edinburgh Seven, the first woman to matriculate in a British university. Educational heroes and trailblazers who have been criminally forgotten from the history books. These women broke the mould for women's education. They became the first women in the UK to receive a medical degree and were amongst some of the first female doctors in the UK. Their story is incredible and I can't wait to share it with you. So let's go! So first of all, let's set the scene. Our story takes place in Victorian Edinburgh back in the 19th century. At this point in time, Edinburgh University was seen as one of the very best centres to practice and learn medicine in the world. And it still held on to this fantastic reputation. But of course, in Victorian society, women were considered to be intellectually and emotionally very different from men. Specifically, they were seen as inferior and a slave to their emotions, often being described as the weaker sex. And it was in the face of these countless obstacles about how women were perceived that 7 women were about to change history. So it all begins with a woman called Sophia Jex-Blake. Sophia was born in 1840 in England in a town called Hastings, and she had a really comfortable upbringing. Despite her parents' protests, she enrolled in Queen's College London, which was the first educational institute in Great Britain that offered girls and women the opportunity to get academic qualifications. She was offered a teaching position, which she accepted, but then her father, when he learned that she would actually, shock horror, be paid for doing this work, refused to allow her to take it. Instead, she decided to go to the US at the age of 21, and there she worked for a while as an administrative assistant at the New England Hospital for Women and Children in Boston. That's where she met the incredible Dr. Lucy Ellen Sewell. Dr. Sewell was one of the earliest women to gain a medical degree in the US, and she was a campaigner for health and social reform in Boston. Her social position and her medical abilities made it much more acceptable for women in the US to begin training or working as medical professionals. Sophia Jex-Blake was so inspired by Dr. Sewell that she decided she would also like to pursue a career in medicine. And when she came back to England, she began applying to different universities. But they all said no. So instead of giving up, she decided to look north of the border and apply to universities there. She applied to Edinburgh University, who also said no. However, then she applied again to ask if she could attend a summer course. This, however, went to a vote. She did have a small number of supporters, although it must also be said that those mainly believed she should only focus on studying gynecology and obstetrics. However, the vast majority objected. Professor of Materia Medica and Therapeutics, Robert Christensen, suggested that the standards of the university would be lowered if they had to teach women. According to him, women had a naturally low intellect and stamina. The surgeon William Walker thought that co-ed classes would be repugnant to patients, saying that many examinations or procedures were so offensive in nature that, of course, having women present would cause many problems. Male students were so horrified at the idea of one woman attending summer lectures that 200 of them signed a petition against it. The university court finally declared it was impossible to change their teaching practices in the interests of one lady. But what did this one lady do? Did she throw in the towel? She did not. Sophia got proactive. Helped by her friend David Mason, an ally of the women's suffrage movement, she advertised in the newspapers to see if there were any women interested in joining her. She thought that if she could get enough women interested, then the university would run out of arguments. And she started to get some replies from women who were just as badass as she was. The first was Edith Petchey, who humbly wrote to Sophia Jex-Blake saying, "Do you think anything more is requisite to success than moderate abilities and a good share of perseverance? I believe I may lay claim to these, together with a real love of the subjects of study. But regards as any thorough knowledge of these subjects at present, I fear I am deficient in most. I am afraid that I should not, without a good deal of previous study, be able to pass the preliminary exam." Do you think that anything is more requisite to ensure success? Not only did she pass, she scored the highest ever mark in the entrance exam. She was one of 5 women, including Sophia Jex-Blake, to take the entrance exam. These 5 women were the first members of the Edinburgh Seven: Sophia Jex-Blake, Isabel Thorne, Edith Petchey, Matilda Chapman and Helen Evans. Mary Anderson and Emily Bovell joined them shortly afterwards. They didn't know it at the time, but they were about to become trailblazers for the equal education of women. Together, they were the first women to matriculate at British University. But this was only the first step on a very long journey with plenty of hurdles to overcome. First of all, the women had to pay exorbitant fees, justified by the argument that they had to have individual classes and couldn't possibly mix with male students. In open exams, the women outperformed the men, but they were graded differently. This meant that they weren't eligible for academic prizes, and it was really difficult to get a scholarship. Jex-Blake took the role as the leader, organising extra tuition in maths and sorting out lectures. The male classmates did not react well to being outperformed by women. They started a campaign of intimidation, most likely encouraged by their professors. This included shutting doors in their face, crowding around their usual seats, and laughing loudly and howling whenever they came near. They also regularly followed the women home, even attaching a firework once to Sophia Jex-Blake's door. They sent them horrible letters and shouted "whore" at them in the street. To protect themselves, the women took precautions by not walking to the campus alone and not going out at night. Again, what's new? This harassment and intimidation culminated in an attack in 1870 known as the riot at Sergeants' Hall, which you can see behind me. The Seven were trying to enter an anatomy exam when 200 male students and locals stopped them from entering by throwing mud, rubbish and insults at them. Despite what must have been an absolutely terrifying experience, these tenacious ladies didn't give up. They eventually managed to make their way into the exam hall, and what was the protesters' reaction to this? They threw a sheep into the exam hall. Seriously, guys. A sheep. But every cloud does have a silver lining. The attack really brought the women's case into the public eye. Many male students were horrified by what had happened and volunteered to be their unofficial bodyguards. The local newspaper, The Scotsman, urged all men to come forward and express their detestation of the proceedings, which have characterised and dishonoured the opposition to ladies pursuing the study of medicine in Edinburgh. And people did. Supporters founded a general committee for securing a complete medical education for women. Among its 300 influential members was Charles Darwin. The committee helped to plan the women's campaign and fundraise for it. The men who had been protesting, however, weren't happy about this, and they signed a petition to the university basically saying they couldn't have women in their classes because it distracted them too much, and this was the women's fault, not theirs. I am so glad that no one uses that argument anymore. Oh, wait. They made a poorly veiled threat that if mixed classes weren't cancelled, they'd cause trouble. And unsurprisingly, the university voted 27-4 against mixed classes. Not only that, the man accused as being the ringleader of the protests by Sophia Jex-Blake, a guy called Edward Cunningham Craig, sued Sophia for defamation, saying that she'd accused him of being drunk and using foul language at the riot. The court found in favour of Cunningham, but they only awarded him a farthing in compensation, which suggests they weren't on his side. Cunningham probably wasn't the real instigator of these events. It's much more likely it was masterminded by that Dr. Robert Christensen, the one who'd been against them from the very beginning. In 1873, the women passed all their final exams. They had beaten all the odds, enduring abuse from professors and classmates, paying exorbitant fees, and passing more difficult exams than their male counterparts. But just as the finishing line was in sight, the university pulled the rug from under their feet. They wouldn't let them graduate. The excuse that they gave was that women couldn't work on wards. The Edinburgh Seven and their supporters took the university to a higher court, but they were overruled. And then Edinburgh University retrospectively said they should never have allowed women in the first place. It would be more than understandable that these women, after everything they had faced, decided to call it a day. But they didn't. They kept fighting. They just took the battle elsewhere. Sophia Jex-Blake, alongside Elizabeth Garrett Anderson and Elizabeth Blackwell, moved to London in 1874 to set up the London School of Medicine for women. Elizabeth Blackwell, new name in our story, was the first woman to receive a medical degree from the United States. Jex-Blake continued to train the next generation of women in medicine while campaigning and studying herself. This was despite there still being no place to set the medical exam for women in Great Britain. Finally, in 1876, the UK Medical Act was passed. This allowed all applicants, regardless of their gender, to obtain a medical licence in the UK. Before going to Dublin, the first place to offer this, Jex-Blake and Petrie went to Switzerland to finish their medical doctorate. 4 months later, in 1877, they went to Dublin and passed their exams. Jex-Blake was the third woman in Britain to officially become a doctor. And Jex-Blake went on to do amazing things. She left the London School of Medicine for Women in the capable hands of Isabel Thorne and came back to Edinburgh to become the city's first female doctor. She set up a clinic for poor patients and became integral in founding the Edinburgh School of Medicine for Women. This was where Elsie Ingalls, Scotland's most famous female doctor, would go on to study. She also established the Edinburgh Hospital and Dispensary for Women, Scotland's first hospital for women, entirely staffed by women. The other 6 were incredible too, and for me one of the most amazing things about their legacy is how much they gave back to their communities and made sure to give back to women entering education. After practicing in Leeds, Edith Petrie moved to Mumbai, and there she started a training programme for female nurses, campaigned for equal pay in the medical professions, and sponsored one of the first female doctors to practice in India, Brooke Mabai. Brooke Mabai is another absolute medical badass, by the way, and I really recommend checking her information out about her too. Even after her death in 1908, Petrie continued to support women entering the medical profession, thanks to the scholarship that her husband founded in her name. Bovell and Anderson worked at London's new hospital for women, and Chaplin founded a midwifery school in Tokyo and then gained her MD in Paris, sitting her exams in Dublin and starting up a private practice in London. Thorne and Evans weren't able to complete their medical studies, but they did take on administrative roles at the London and Edinburgh Schools of Medicine for Women, continuing to oversee generations of female doctors for years to come, including 2 of Thorne's own daughters. These women knew the value of having access to learning, and they ensured that their knowledge would go on to open doors for many women. And not only for those who wanted to be doctors, they paved the way for all women to enter further education. As for Edinburgh University, they resisted the waves of change. It eventually began to allow women to graduate, 25 years after Jex-Blake's initial application. And its first female doctors graduated in 1896. One last kick in the teeth though, they still had to organise their own classes. The story of the Edinburgh Seven is inspirational, without a doubt. But it's also tragic. Many of the hardships that they had to go through are still recognisable to women in 2022. They were finally given posthumous degrees in 2019. That's 150 years after they should have graduated. And the only mark to them is this tiny plaque outside Surgeons' Hall. Compare that to the countless statues and books we have of Edinburgh medical men. Despite this incredible story, a quick Google will show you that there are a pitiful amount of resources to educate you about these women. We still have very far to go when it comes to recognising and celebrating the contributions that women have made throughout history. I hope that this humble video will at least go some way to correcting that. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe and we will see you next time. Bye!